Welcome everybody. Today I want to start by talking about policing. I'll briefly speak on its origin in the US, its evolution so far, and how we get back to true public service, if that's even possible. Before we get started, everything I say, unless specifically cited, is my opinion and my personal theory. Though several topics, incidents, and events may be verified through research, I do not consider myself an expert on any subject. Nor do I consider anything I say that of legal advice or counsel. The story of policing in America is one of evolution, shaped by community needs, political pressures, social change, and advancing technology. What began as informal community protection has transformed into a highly specialized, professionalized institution that looks very different today than it did nearly 4 centuries ago. To understand how we arrived at the modern image of a fully equipped officer, often appearing more like a soldier stepping off of a battlefield than that of a neighborhood guardian, we have to start at the beginning. In 1635, the city of Boston created what was known as the Night Watch. These early officers were considered observers and received no pay. It was in essence an official neighborhood watch program, citizens volunteering to protect their own community under the cover of darkness. More than a century later, in 1789, the United States Congress established the first federal law enforcement position, the United States Marshal. Under President George Washington, 13 United States Marshals were appointed, marking the beginning of a federal level policing authority. In 1835, the state of Texas established what we know today as the Texas Rangers, recognized as the oldest statewide law enforcement agency in America. Just a few years later, in 1838, Boston formed the first publicly funded full-time police department with paid officers and structured police services. Other major cities soon followed, such as New York City in 1844 and Philadelphia in 1854. The first police badge, often called a shield, was instituted in 1845 by the New York City Police Department, clearly identifying who held authority. However, early American police departments looked nothing like they do today. Officers were often responsible for housing the homeless, operating soup lines, finding employment for the unemployed, and managing public works. Law enforcement was intertwined with social services and municipal maintenance, reflecting the practical needs of a rapidly growing city. By the early 1900s, policing shifted its focus from public works toward enforcing prohibition laws and providing assistance to political figures. This era frequently became associated with corruption, patronage, and political influence. In response, the period from the 1930s through the 1960s became known as the Reform Era, or the responsive model of policing. Departments began to embrace professionalism, specialization, and an incident-driven approach. Technology began to reshape the job. Patrol cars and radio dispatch systems often allowed officers to respond more quickly and cover larger areas. In 1968, the implementation of the Universal 911 emergency system solidified the reactive, call-driven model that continues to define much of modern policing as we know it today. The physical image of a police officer evolved alongside these changes. Originally clad in dark navy wool uniforms to distinguish them from everyday citizens, officers gradually adopted standardized equipment such as whistles, blackjacks and batons, flashlights, and eventually pistols. Over time, officers moved from carrying simple noise-making devices to an array of less lethal and lethal tools. Today, in 2026, a single officer may carry everything from a whistle to a firearm, along with communication devices, protective gear, and specialized equipment. The transformation from unpaid night watchmen to heavily equipped professionals prompts an important question. How did we get here? Well, let's talk about it. So how did we get to where officers have a ton of stuff all over their vests? They have outer vest carriers, they're wearing tactical boots, they're wearing BDU pants, style pants, ball caps when they used to wear, garrison caps. How did we get here? Well, it's honestly trying to keep up with the times, right? So when I was a kid, I watched shows like Rescue 911. I watched the show Cops. As I got older, there were Adam 12, Hill Street Blues. And what I took away from a lot of those shows at that time and watching shows from that time was the officers and the police department's ability to relate to the community and interact with the community. And I'm not putting everything on the officer, because in the same, the community also interacted with police. I'll never, ever, ever, ever forget the very first time that I was being trained. I was riding in a police car. I was in the passenger seat, and I'm riding down the street, and I'm waving at everybody. And the person training me asked me, he said, "Are you running for mayor?" And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Why are you waving at all these people?" I'm like, "Because that's what we do, you know?" He's like, "They don't want to wave at you." And then shortly, it wasn't that long after, I found a certain set of fingers waving back at me. And I was like, man, you know, but you got to make that attempt, right? So often, I feel like between the media, everyday conversation, personal interactions, things are taken the wrong way. And we tend to allow our emotions to dictate a broad spectrum of views, right? So instead of taking one incident and trying to dissect and go, okay, why did this happen? We tend to just take that incident and go, man, that happened. So now every incident's going to be like that. And that doesn't seem to be or it shouldn't be the case. I'm not putting everything on officers. I'm not putting everything on the community. Both sides need to come together and understand each other a lot better. Originally, from what I can read online, from what I read in books, from the stuff I've been told from old timers that have been around as officers, years ago, not even 10 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, when an officer arrived or you encountered a police officer, there was that certain level of respect. That officer commanded a level of respect. And, we ask ourselves, what's changed over these past so many years, these couple of decades? What's changed? I mean, I don't even know where to start. But a lot of it, I would say, is the implementation of social media, for sure. Everybody has a camera now. Hiring standards have become relaxed. Stresses the economy. And I'm just speaking about police officers right now. But everything has changed drastically on all aspects of our lives. And that has led to a more distant relationship between officers and the community. Unfortunately, with social media and handheld devices like cell phones and cameras, we're able to take snippets of things that happen and throw it online and hurry up and grab views with zero context behind it. And everybody will take that and run with it. And that's highly unfortunate, because it leads to bad views on everybody across the board. Not enough people are willing to take the time and talk. Not enough people are willing to take enough time and listen. And so often we get put in these positions as police officers and as the community of just being burnt out and tired. And I remember when I was working at the prison, an inmate told me, if you treat a person like an animal, eventually they're going to start to act like an animal. And I've used that kind of phrase or that wordage my entire career in both corrections and in policing. And I would tell people, if you are treated like an animal, eventually you'll start to be treated like an animal. And one of my examples I use is if you come into an establishment, let's say I'm working at a fast food restaurant, and you come in every day and I greet you. Hey, how we doing today? And you tell me to screw off every single day. Eventually, not only am I going to quit greeting you, but I'm going to start treating other people like you treat me. And individually, we fail to recognize that within ourselves, I think, a lot of times. But it's also easier to jump on that mob mentality. On the community side, if you see a bad encounter with an officer, it's very easy for you to now look at other officers and maybe not immediately go, well, that's going to happen next time, but you're watching for that to happen next time. You're not looking like, oh, what's going on? You're looking at what's this officer going to do wrong this time. And as an officer, from the officer's standpoint, if you have a bad interaction with a community member, you may start to eventually look at every community member that you interact with in the same manner. I'm waiting for them to respond that way. I'm waiting for them to resist or to not cooperate. And eventually both sides start to jump the gun. Before anything's happened, they start to overreact. And that's a problem. We also fail to take, on both sides, we fail to take into consideration our personal lives. You know, numerous jobs I've worked at, but particularly policing and corrections, they always tell you, you know, like at the prison, hey, leave your personal life at the door. Don't bring it behind the walls. And the same with policing, you know, leave your personal life at home. I'm here to tell you that is difficult. Male or female, no matter who you are, you're at home and you get into it with your spouse or your children and you have a heated discussion to the point where you tell each other, you know, don't be here when I get back. You're just expected to change your mind and go do your job. I mean, that's very difficult to do, but it happens every single day, just like individuals at home. I will never forget, I helped a neighboring agency. It was Thanksgiving Day, and there was a call for domestic, and one of the parties had a firearm. We're set up around this house. We end up getting one of the parties. They came out of the garage, and once they were apprehended, you know, we start talking to the individual, and we're like, "What's going on? Why are we here today?" This person had spent Thanksgiving. They had spent their entire morning at a soup kitchen preparing meals for people in the community. Came home and didn't have a meal prepared for them by their significant other, and they lost it. So that's all it took. You know what I mean? And I'm sure there was other outlying factors that contributed to that, but most people can't fathom that situation. Most people can't fathom, I'm going to go help the community, come home, and then just completely lose it on my own family. But it happens. And oftentimes, you gotta have the right mindset to do that job. From a community standpoint, I feel like we have to have the mindset of what's that officer going through mentally, within their family. Have they recently had some tragic incident in their family? Is this situation going to trigger an emotion within that officer that's going to have them respond where they in a way that they normally wouldn't? And we could go back and forth all day, but how do we fix it? Well, like I said, I used to watch Cops, man, and back in the early 90s, the late 80s and early 90s, you would see cops walking down the streets in neighborhoods on TV, handing out, you know, baseball cards. They used to make cop-themed baseball cards and hand them out. And I'm not saying that you can't do that now, but at least around here where I'm from, we don't have two-man cars all the time. And what I mean by that is there's not two officers in one car. 10, 15, 20 years ago, and sometimes there are, but a majority of departments don't have the ability to have multiple officers in one car. And a lot of officers, most officers that I know of are assigned to what we consider districts, certain locations in that part of town that they police. Between safety and call volumes, they don't have the ability to get out and walk around. And even if they did, it's for a very short period of time. That still doesn't dismiss the fact that they can't, or at least make an attempt, but it is not feasible anymore for them to do that on a regular basis. So quite often you see police officers and they're driving by or they're handling a situation in that moment. So how do we change that? I feel like as citizens, as a culture in America today, we've come to the point that we hate police. Not everybody, and I shouldn't say that, but there's a deep disdain for police officers in America today. So with that mindset, we're quite often not quick to jump at creating an interaction with an officer on a positive note. We also don't want to have, we don't want to have a bad situation arise and us be a part of it. And unfortunately, there's so many people that get backlashed for having those positive interactions. That's not promoted enough. And not that we need to promote every interaction, but as a community, we need to be accepting that the same people policing us are the same people living amongst us. And I don't know how to fix that. As policing, especially in larger cities, higher call volume areas, it's not always feasible to sit there and talk to someone for an hour. You may have several calls pending that could be more urgent that you have to go handle. Or you may be pulled away from this situation that is considered by formula not as urgent. And it's unfortunate that in policing we have formulas now that dictate where the urgency levels rise. You may be having the worst day of your life and all you need is somebody there to talk to you. This officer has arrived, they're talking to you, and they get pulled away to go handle another situation. So how does that make you feel? The people that are supposed to be there for you are now leaving you. And policing has come a long way. We've now implemented community mental health services. And it doesn't necessarily always revolve around mental health because mental health has been lumped into just a bunch of different, I don't want to use the term disorders, but it's been lumped into a bunch of different categories of things that have been put together. So if you're having a bad day and you need someone to talk to, you're going to most likely in some areas have a mental health representative come and speak with you. It doesn't mean that you have a mental health problem. It just means there's someone that has been designed and trained to come and speak with you and help answer questions you may have or talk you through situations. But how do we get back to police officers taking 5 minutes, getting out and interacting with the community and building that relationship with the community again? To be quite honest, it starts at home. It starts with a good solid foundation at home. You have to have a respect level instilled in you from a young age and then learn to recognize when that respect is promoted, given, taken, things of that course. Everybody doesn't deserve respect. And I feel like we've come as a society, we've become one of, well, your respect has to be earned. You've got to earn my respect, and I'm not giving you respect until I know you're worthy of it. And that's not fair, because if everybody has that mentality, then nobody's getting respect. You know what I mean? From a young age, I was kind of taught, and it was like, if you walked into a room and adults were talking, you didn't speak until you were acknowledged. And if you did interrupt them, you were going to feel it later. You know what I mean? If not in the moment. But I feel like there's not that respect anymore. I specifically remember an instance when I was working at the prison and I was going around and I was counting. Everybody's locked up, and we had a television at the end of the wing. And a lot of times, the inmates could look through their doors and they could see the TV from most cells while they were in their cell. And as I'm counting, this young gentleman, he goes, put it on channel 12. And I'm like, what? I said, what'd you say? He goes, the TV, put it on channel 12. And I just walked by. And when I was done counting, I went to one of the old heads on the deck and I said, yo, my man, you need to holler at this dude up here. And, you need to get his mind right. Because that's not how we talk to people. So day room happens and the old head come up to me and he talked to me and he goes, hey, I talked to this young man. That was his way of asking you. And I remember at the time I couldn't fathom him telling me what to do was his way of asking. And maybe he didn't personally see it as him telling me what to do. Maybe he legitimately felt like he was asking. And at the same time, I felt like he was telling me what to do. I never thought about that's his way of asking. So it builds that immediate response of respect is gone. You know what I mean? And from that point on, I learned to kind of take a few minutes and educate whenever I could. So in that aspect, had I had to replay that again with what I know now, my man tells me, hey, put it on channel 12. I'm going to go, what are you wanting? So are you asking me? I'm going to kind of talk through it with him, because it never occurred to me that he doesn't know how to ask a question. And I know a lot of you watching this might go, how does somebody not know how to ask a question? In the same aspect that I've had supervisors tell me, some people you need to tell to, hey, please have a seat. Let me talk to you for a second. And some people you might have to tell, shut the heck up and sit down, using certain swear words to get through to them. And again, that's a shock. Most people are like, if you talk to people in that manner, you're being highly disrespectful. And that's not inaccurate. But unfortunately, some people only know that style. So I'm not saying to continue the conversation that way, but sometimes you need to tell someone in a very firm, aggressive manner to do something, and that gets their attention. And then you can bring it down. It took many years for me to learn to not match energy. All over social media, all over, society, you hear, I'm going to match that energy. That often begets bad situations. So in my professional life, what I've tried to do is, if you start screaming, I may scream a little higher, but I try to talk a little lower, because eventually you're going to quit screaming so you can hear and understand what I'm saying, even if I got to bring it down to a whisper. And it doesn't always work, but you got to try different methods to get through to different people. And we get so hung up, on both sides, policing and the community, of sticking with that same mainline way of action, that it's ineffective a lot of times. And then we look back on the other person like it's their fault. But we never take into consideration, what could we have done differently? So I feel like, aside from just talking, what else can we do? Police departments as a whole can start to promote themselves in a better light. And I'm not saying just acknowledge all the good things you're doing. Sometimes you got to put out there the bad things that take place and acknowledge those and say, hey, listen, this took place. We're learning from it. We're going to try our best not to let it happen again. And oftentimes, from the police officer's perspective, if you do something wrong, there's not a lot of corrective measures. There's come into the captain's office or, the supervisor's office, and we're going to have a talk, and I'm going to tell you that you're not going to do this again. Why did you do it? You're going to explain it, and it's either going to be addressed by the supervisor as, well, you can't do that, or that doesn't look good. Or they're going to discipline you in a manner that you've received discipline, but there's really no corrective action. Not often do we take the time to sit down with our subordinates and go, hey, let's work on this. I don't know how many times in the past 8 years that I was an officer, I don't know how many times a supervisor ever came to me and said, how are you doing today? Is everything okay? Everything at home good? Family good? Can I get anything for you? You doing good? What do you need? That's very rare. And that may, similar situations may take place in everyday jobs, but in policing, as with other jobs, that's very important to not only know your people, but see how you can help them. Because if they're having a bad day and they don't feel like they can talk to you about it because that may hinder them being able to do their job, how do they get through it? Now they're self-medicating. And I'm not talking about with prescriptions or with alcohol or anything like that. I'm saying mentally they're trying to self-medicate and work through that themselves, or they suppress it. And when you suppress it for so long, eventually it's got to come out, right? So how do we change that? And I keep asking that, but I don't have all the answers, but I'm telling you, from an individual who had a not so great child upbringing, I was pretty much running the streets since I was in 5th grade. I often told people I should have been in prison, or I would have never imagined I would be a police officer. I truly became a police officer because I wanted to help people. And I know, like, everybody's always like, oh, why do you want to be a cop? Oh, I want to help people. How cliche is that? But for me, that was the genuine meaning. I wanted to help people. I worked my entire adult life into becoming a police officer. Between the military, between schooling, my personal education, as far as reading books, reading articles, trying to educate myself. No matter how good you are at something, there's always something that can take that away from you. So to have others check in on you and help you and support you, that makes a huge difference. And on the community side, we can do that with each other. Reach out to people. If you know somebody's having a bad day or you think they're having a bad day, reach out to them. They might push you away, but eventually somebody's going to talk to you, right? And at the end of the day, excuse me, at the end of the day, a lot of things can be resolved by communication. And that doesn't mean that we have to agree with each other. That doesn't mean that we have to accept what the other person says as bona fide. But it hurts us to not talk to each other. A few years ago, I did a video with a couple of guys that had had some interactions with police, and they were negative interactions. And when I first started coming around them, they wouldn't say two words to me. They really didn't. And it wasn't because they knew I was a bad person. They just merely knew me as a police officer. And just by talking to them, you build that rapport, you build that relationship. And it's so funny because one of the individuals ended up being stopped, and I show up on the traffic stop, and I'm sure if he was here now, he'd tell you the same. Like his heart probably relaxed so much when he seen me on the stop because now he's got a familiar face that he's comfortable with. But prior to me introducing myself to that stop, his stress level was up here. He's stressed out because of his previous interactions. And that's how so many things go sideways because we're hung up on these past interactions. Excuse me. For all intentions, I should hate the police. I should have nothing to like the police. I had numerous interactions with the police when I was younger, but there's a handful of them that stuck out to me. There's a gentleman who retired from a local city here. He probably has no idea who I am, but I remember him being around the school system when I was in high school, in grade school. He now is in a community position. He's retired, but he works for the police department in a community position. Another individual, he arrested me when I was like 13 or 14. And then I became a police officer and I call for the wagon to come pick up somebody that I had arrested. And he shows up. And I was like, man, it's a small, small world. And so those individuals that had those interactions, I like I said, I had multiple negative interactions with police, but a lot of those were my fault because I was a young hothead that thought, nobody could touch me. But I now know that what they did for me at the time, could have just been they didn't want to do any paperwork or they wanted an easy way out that shift. But it gave me those insights that stuck with me for the rest of my life. Like they could have done something differently. You know what I mean? And so those few interactions really stuck with me and made me want to do the same for other people. And I tried on so many levels to do that once I became a police officer as well as when I was in corrections. And it worked out for me a lot. I can't tell you the amount of times where I would stop someone on a regular traffic stop and then have a more serious interaction with them down the road. And because we had that favorable interaction initially, they remembered that and now I was comfortable to be around. And that's kind of what we got to start to do. Cops don't always have to be negative in their aspects. There's so many cops today that wear a badge and go, well, this is the badge. You're going to listen to me. And unfortunately, I don't want to say that's built by design, But it's been created by design almost. We've lowered hiring standards. Training practices are almost minimal. And that's not desired by departments. If every department could have the most highly trained individual working for them, they would, But money, everything revolves around money. And that's not the only thing. But to give you an example, if you have 50 officers for your department and you have to train them officers at the highest standard, eventually you got to take all of those officers out of service at one point or another. So you're either paying a trainer, an instructor, all of this money to spend all of this time to train these individuals, or you're paying this instructor to train all of these individuals in a shorter amount of time. With that, you have to rotate these officers out. You've got to take these officers off the street. You've got to replace them with overtime. You have to also pay the officers that are being trained. Money is a huge factor. And when you budget that into everything else that's required by police departments nowadays, it starts to become a strain on the department. So yeah, we can have the most highly trained officers, but we're going to have the most outdated equipment. It's like a balance beam, how do we have the best equipment or the best equipment that we can use at this time while also giving our officers the best opportunities for training? Unfortunately, there's no good answer unless we can just have an unlimited amount of funds. And even with that, even with the highest training standards, the highest hiring standards, you're still going to have people that are just not meant to do this job. You have veterans who are police officers. You have college-educated individuals that are police officers, people with master's degrees that are police officers. You have people that have never done a day of college in their life and never served a day of military service in their life. And every one of those classifications can be the worst officer you've ever had, or they can be the best officer you've ever had. Training isn't everything. A lot of factors come into play. But no matter how good your officers or your department is, if the community's not willing to reciprocate that, what good are they? What good is everything that's been implemented if it doesn't work out? How do we get it to work out? And again, it goes back to home and respect. You start that respect, you start instilling respect on various levels, and that'll slowly start to take place when it needs to. And what I mean by that is, if you're taught at a young age, thank you, please, sir, ma'am, asking questions with full sentences and understanding that you could be told no, or you could be told an answer that you don't agree with. Agreeing to disagree doesn't mean you have to hate each other. But you don't have to agree on the same things. Having conversations at home with our family members, our friends, our children, and explaining to them consequences. So many individuals don't know consequences. And that's not, I'm not just putting all that on the community, because there's a lot of police officers that don't understand consequences because they've gone so many times without getting caught or without getting disciplined or counseled for certain interactions that continues to be standard practice for them. So on both sides, learning to understand consequences. Schooling has become such a major integral part of our childhood that adults are now being indoctrinated to, do what is not customary 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so you have generations that don't understand generations, and there's not enough acceptance and there's not enough communication. So can we ever really truly get back to where officers are wearing, polyester uniforms, a couple of gadgets on their belt, and going back to having true community policing? To be quite honest, I don't think we'll ever see that again. Many officers now have outer vest carriers, And that's not necessarily to look tactical or to look militarized. It is by design because of medical issues. As policing has evolved, we have not only found that you can't always jump to your gun. You can't, physical capabilities aren't always there. So we've implemented things like pepper spray, OC spray, ASP batons, wooden batons, tasers. There's so many things that have come into play that now officers have to utilize prior to deadly force. And a lot of times, there's not enough training on those tools and scenarios to use those tools. You have to do things so many times before it can become muscle memory, before it can become truly understood. And quite often it goes back to the training where officers aren't allowed or they don't have the means to train as much as they need to. And so the only real use they get out of those tools or the training they get from those tools that they're required to carry are in real life scenarios. And it's not customary for everyday citizens to fight each other. So you have that fight or flight response where you're either going to fight, you're going to flight, or you're going to freeze. And that doesn't change just because you become an officer. You become an officer and all of a sudden, oh, I'm Hercules. That's not the case. The amount of times that citizens freeze up or they try to flee or they try to fight, that's a natural response. And most people go, well, if you just wouldn't have fought the police. We don't understand the full situation. That goes back to what's going on in that individual's mind. What have they experienced in the past that has led them to believe that they need to fight? Or are they just being unruly and discontent because they don't like police for whatever reason? I don't know. I don't have the answers. So that's kind of my introduction into policing. Where it's come from. We've come from officers, walking the beat. They're walking their neighborhoods. They're on foot. They're dressed professionally, shined boots, pressed uniforms. They've got a radio and a sidearm. And they're walking and they're interacting with the community. There's a respect level there. And now we have officers that look like soldiers. Literally, we have BDU pants. We've got all kinds of gadgets. We've got cameras on our vests. There's cameras everywhere you look when you go outside. And that takes a toll because in your mind, as a citizen and as an officer, there's so many things that you're trying to process when this incident is taking place. And instead of just stepping aside and going, this is the incident, this is what's going on, let's let these people be involved in the incident and not interject ourselves or not interject an opinion until everybody knows everything. But instead, we've got to get a high volume of responses based on a certain video or a certain incident. We've got to quickly come up with a narrative because people need answers. We don't always need answers. You're not always going to have the answers. And before the true answer comes out, we jump to a conclusion because that's how we've been conditioned in society these days. So how do we change that? How do we quit jumping to conclusions? I think that's going to be very hard to do considering everybody wants to be famous. Everybody wants their opinion notated. Everybody wants their opinion acknowledged. And we become too stubborn to realize that we're all not the same. You've got somebody in society who, grew up in a two-parent home, had dinner every Sunday, with the family, went on vacations, parents had a good job, they went off to college, now they have a good job. Then you have somebody who grew up and was raised by the community, and everybody in the community is considered their family, quote unquote. They struggle to have a job. They didn't do well in school because their cognitive abilities, that wasn't their thing. And so just two different people. And we fail to recognize that as humans, that everybody, even though we're classified as the same, we're all humans, we're very much different. And until we can acknowledge that, we can't begin to communicate. And until we begin to communicate, we can't instill change and positivity in the interaction between policing and the community. One of my favorite things, that was the whole reason I loved being a cop, was interacting with the community. I absolutely loved talking to people. And at the end of that conversation, at the end of the conversation, they go, man, I never in my life thought I'd be sitting here talking to a cop. The amount of positive interactions that I've had that led from a negative interaction, I can't even count. But there's several that come to mind, and it makes you feel good, because you know, like, at the end of the day, they may not see all, these people in the community, they may not see all policing as positive, but they're going to remember you. And eventually, if more officers take the time and do the same thing, then you start to build that relationship. And if more community members take the time to just give them a second, allow them to educate, allow them to articulate what they're doing, why they're doing it, then we can kind of start to build that gap that we have, because we are so far away from each other that's not even funny. And there's so many people that there's so many communities that have really good community policing segments put in there. But when you get to bigger cities, it's so hard to do that. It's so hard to allow all of the officers to spend time, because they've got a high call volume. And when you get to these smaller towns and these handful of officer towns, it can be just as hard, because now you're trying to cover shifts. You have a bad interaction with this person over here. Immediately, this person knows about it, and they're expecting that bad interaction. So it's difficult. And it takes a lot of effort on both sides to fully understand each other. So, without rambling, what I would say is start every day with trying to learn something new about someone. And if you're somebody in the community that has had a negative interaction with police, the next time you come across one, just say hi. Just reach out. Go out of your comfort zone to acknowledge that officer. As an officer, think the same way. Hey, this person may have a negative interaction with policing in the past. What can I do to change that as I approach a situation that I'm about to embark on? So I think if we can start to do that, then we can start to get there. But going back to, Barney Fife days, I don't think we're ever going to go back to having police look like old school police officers. There's just too many requirements set in place that they have to employ, that physically it doesn't allow them on a daily routine basis to appear like that. So I think one thing we can do is, there's several departments, like the department around here, their outer vest carrier is designed to be more of like a dress outer vest carrier. It still has everything on it, but it blends in very well with their uniform. Maybe consider that as a department when you're changing uniforms or you're addressing your uniforms. Maybe don't look so tactical. We don't need to jump out of our vehicles looking tactical on every single daily routine. Let's save those tactical looking appearances for tactical looking incidents. And as a community, let's remember that officers often have to go from a very simple interaction with someone where it may just require a verbal interaction to a very hostile, aggressive interaction in a matter of seconds. So for them to be able to have the maneuverability and the comfortability to be able to handle that situation, that's why they have to wear those things. It's been determined over the course of several decades that where we are now and how police officers look now is almost a requirement based on the needs of service that's been called upon them. So, what I would ask is, how do you feel about the community and police departments' interactions with each other? What are your thoughts on it? What do you think can be done differently? Do you agree or disagree with anything I said? What would you change and why would you change it? So these are all things I plan on covering in future videos, hopefully. I know this was kind of like an awkward video setup at this time. I'm trying to get everything worked out, but I would like to try to incorporate a little bit of history in everything that I talk about, to kind of give everybody an idea of where policing has come from. And I plan on doing that with the community side as well. Initially, I want to have, a handful of police-related, law enforcement-related individuals, to include corrections, to come in and talk back and forth with me, go over several topics, to kind of give you guys an idea of what it is to be a police officer. And then I want to bring in some community people, and by that I mean everyday citizens. I'm not talking about going to find the mayor and politicians and stuff like that. I want to bring in people from the community and get their perspective on policing. And then I feel like we can start to really bring two and two together and maybe start to build those community policing conversations through this channel, and build a better relationship between both. And hopefully that will lead to better interactions between both when each are encountered, if that makes sense. So I appreciate you guys' time. Thanks for kind of, working through this with me. I know it's a little awkward. The setup's kind of weird right now, but I'm getting there. Any feedback would be great. Like, share, subscribe if you wouldn't mind. It would really help me out. The more subscribers I get to, I can go live, and then we can have these, real-time interactions and conversations. And I think that would really be beneficial to a lot of people. So thank you guys. And then, till next time, I'll get the video out as soon as I can. Thank you guys.